We're gonna start this video with a little bit of an exercise. What I want you to do is close your eyes. Okay, perfect, now I don't have to edit this video anymore. Imagine you walk into a nice hotel during a vacation that you've been saving up for a long time. You step into the lobby, it's clean, there's a gold statue in every corner of the room. You're incredibly rich in this scenario, by the way, I forgot to mention, and also unbelievably attractive. That has no bearing on the actual story, but as long as we're imagining things, you look like if Ian Somerhalder and Robert Pattinson had a baby, just one big walking jawline. The concierge greets you, some employees grab your bags, and you're led to the elevator where you hit a button for the top floor. You get up there, walk into your room, and boom, king-size bed, overhead shower in the bathroom that looks over a beautiful skyline, mini fridge with free drinks, dinner table so long they had to place 3 smaller tables end to end. Life is good and you're ready to have a sweet ass time. Now, imagine walking into that same hotel, but instead of the entrance leading to the lobby this time around, it leads to the engine room. Why is there an engine room in a hotel? I don't know. This is the same scenario where you're rich and attractive. Are we really questioning our suspension of disbelief now? You navigate through the engine room into the breakfast hall, which leads to the pool. There's no edges to walk on, so you gotta swim across, strolling through the indoor car wash, and finally you're in the lobby. The concierge is passed out on his desk. The 4 gold statues are all placed in a single corner, covering each other up for some reason. You lug your now waterlogged suitcases yourself into the elevator, where every floor number has now been translated to Tengwar and placed in a random order. After 18 attempts, you make it to your floor, walk into your room, and find the same king-size bed and overhead shower with a great view. Only problem is, they're right on top of each other. If you want to take a shower, your bed's getting drowned. The mini fridge is still there, bigger and better than before, but it only opens once you recite the entirety of the Declaration of Independence, and your 3-piece table has been spread out to different spots and angles in the room, bolted to the floor so they can't move. You haven't missed out on anything you had before. If anything, your amenities are even better this time around. I feel like we really glossed over that indoor car wash, but the way that it's been laid out and presented ranges from inconvenient to confusing to frustrating to straight up unusable. You can be given all the right pieces, but if some jackass decides to smash them together like a toddler, the final result can be so much less than the sum of its parts. What this unbearably long analogy is trying to say is that presentation and organization are crucial to an enjoyable experience. And if we segue that into the digital world, for everything out there, including apps, websites, and games, UI is incredibly important. I feel like a lot of people only give UI the time of day when it's part of weird internet beefs, and even then, they tend to simplify it into 1 or 2 things. When I brought this topic on my Discord, which, casual little plug there, check it out, it's in the description, I'd say 90% of the responses I got initially went straight to the heads-up display, and specifically those HUDs being cluttered versus simple. As the conversation continued, people admitted that a lot of the time they didn't really think specifically about UI unless it got in their face, like this for example, which, yeah, I can't really blame you there, but it definitely had a subconscious effect on their experience. And I think it's interesting that nobody associated UI with menu screens, loading screens, the way tutorials are presented, codexes, and even the use of colors, and instead jumped straight to, are the overlays when playing the game nice to look at or too messy? Whether you think about it or not though, this is an aspect of game design that really ties a lot of things together. I think some people forget this is a lot of people's jobs. Not every game developer is just programming the combat or enemy behavior. People go to school for this stuff. There are full-on departments for this in most big studios with leads and senior UI and UX designers. Bungie holds a multi-day event dedicated to UX. And even though I'm nowhere near an expert on the topic, I'm just an onlooker with a lot of curiosity on the subject. I mean, for God's sakes, I wouldn't even know where to put all the boxes that explain the level design. I'm so low IQ. I still wanted to take some time to discuss the effects of UI past just complaining about mini-maps or objectives being easily visible. And what I want to start with here is menuing. When I was a little bit younger, there was one thing above all else that would determine if I would buy a game or just leave it for the rest of my life. It wasn't something normal like the gameplay was really fun or the story was really good. No, I'd fire up an IGN review, and if the game they were talking about looked too complicated, the shops had too many items, or the things you needed to equip or upgrade seemed like they'd be a chore to sort through or understand, I'd be out instantly. I understand that some games need more complicated systems than others to operate, and in some cases complex menu navigation can be part of the fun, but there's a way to wrap this up and hand it to the player that doesn't immediately freak them out. One of the games that pushed me away because of its unnecessary complexity from an outsider's perspective was Dark Souls, and here's where I hit you with a bit of a hot take already. I really don't like From Software's UI. I've lightly referenced it a few times already in this video, but do you guys remember when that Ubisoft and Horizon dev complained about the quest design and user experience of Elden Ring, and it spawned a bunch of responses of people clowning Ubisoft's interfaces and praising the ever-loving hell out of From Software? Well, I would say that I definitely agree that a lot of games under that Ubi open world umbrella do have a lot of faults when it comes to UI, but let's not act like the Greater Souls series is some holy grail of how to design a good user experience. So many of the arguments that I saw came down to, it doesn't hold your hand, land, it leads you subtly to where you need to go, there's no objective list in front of you, and yeah, that's great. But we're really gonna act like this horse revive confirmation message isn't annoying as hell when you're in mid-combat? We're not gonna talk about how these games usually have pop-ups for everything you pick up, which can get in the way and you can't get rid of them until you confirm it with a button that you can't press when performing other actions, or how there's a bunch of pictures of status effects or buffs underneath the stamina bar that can really pile up, but 90% of the time I can't even tell what they're referring to, or especially how difficult it is for a new player to actually understand what the hell is going on the menu screens. There's no proper explanation for all of these letters and how they correspond to these numbers. Obviously veterans will easily recognize it as weapon scaling, but to new players the game doesn't convey that well, and most people that I know needed to search up exactly how this worked when playing their first Souls game. A lot of the pre-Sekiro titles in the series also have weirdly placed initial menu screens. This is Dark Souls 3, the pop-up is just this little rectangle in the middle left of the screen. This one is at least just aesthetics at the end of the day, but it's still a bit strange, like that is weird placement. So much information is blasted at you at every single menu. If you move to your inventory, there is a bit of sectioning off for items and tools of different kinds, but when you loot around a lot, it really gets bloated and cumbersome, and it's not helped by the fact that weapons can appear multiple times in your inventory. I get that duplicates of weapons are helpful for sharing during online play and for other niche reasons as well, but why not have a ×2 or ×3 in the corner of that weapon's icon? You have that for other items like souls, why do these stack differently? And then there's the issue of important items often being neglected by players because they get lost in all the commotion. I bet 80% of players haven't used an elemental resin of any sort ever before in these games. You're just not guided towards these things that the game specifically wants you to have and use, so they wind up going to waste. These are some of my favorite games ever made, but they could really streamline their information a bit better, and you could be saying, ugh, the lack of explanations and discovering everything for yourself is the whole point, idiot. But there are explicit tutorials in these games, quick as they are, on top of moments where the game subtly nudges you into figuring out what everything means, but in these cases they just sort of leave you out to dry for no reason. Sure, if you find a painting out in the world and the game doesn't tell you what that's meant for, that's a good example of Elden Ring being mysterious and not holding your hand. But to explicitly give all of these numbers and show weapon scaling and how much you're benefiting from upgrading without actually presenting it in a way that's immediately understandable is just failing to do your job. Non-streamlined menus really get on my nerves. I feel like the game is just trying to fill up space to seem complex or high-tech or convince you that there's a lot of depth in the game, but it just feels overwhelming. Look at how much was part of Battlefield 2042's pause overlay screen on release. This is during the game when you want to take a quick peek at a few important figures. And what's craziest about this is that this is pre-scoreboard Battlefield 2042, you know, back when they decided not to have a scoreboard for very clear reasons such as... Why the f did battle? Apparently it was to avoid toxicity, so that's ironic. So how does it look after they added the, oh, okay, yep, got it. That's numbers and figures of some sort, that's for sure. Good menuing is tactile, compact, and visual everywhere it can be, in my opinion. Midnight Fight Express suffers slightly from the fact that it doesn't segment its appearance tabs enough. Some of these sections have over 100 possible items to unlock, and I never felt like going through all of that. But aside from that, it is such a masterclass in menus, coming from a solo project no less. Everything you need to know about collectibles, grades, new enemies, and challenges for levels is given to you up front when you view the levels tab. There's room for everything to breathe. And as you scroll through the other options in the top bar, the background zooms and plays with its focus depending on if the part of the menu that you're on is more game focused or character focused, allowing it to have both consistency and a nice visual flair without doing anything all that fancy. The skill tree is clear to follow and understand, and important statistics like progression are always visible in between each short level, unlike some games that put them somewhere like the main menu screen with you only being able to check your status if you go all the way out of the game. Why is that a thing? Inappropriate placement is sometimes a bit of an inconvenience, but sometimes it significantly hurts the game. Battlefield 1 and Quantum Break, for example, have difficulty options and allow you to change that difficulty mid-game, but only if you go to their exterior menu that handles their chapters, meaning you'll need to start the whole chapter over for the change to take effect, chapters that are much longer than Midnight Fight Express's 5 to 10 minute bursts of action. What a halfway solution, just let me change it in the regular pause screen instead of needing to restart the whole area for a more enjoyable difficulty. Sometimes though it's just a bit of a head scratcher, like how GTA 5 had you go straight into the single player and then open up your menu and select multiplayer, which required two incredibly long loading screens instead of just having an online option on the main menu. Or how Multiversus puts all of its game modes under play, including custom game, but custom game is also sitting here with the practice modes. Like, what? Why? What's the point of this? That game also turns its match settings into a goddamn Easter egg by listing the current settings followed by a book icon with a touchpad symbol for PlayStation all the way up at the top right of the screen. A touchpad symbol that basically looks like a rectangle, by the way, so not only is it tucked away and hard to find, but it's also unclear what it means when you find it, which are two things that you definitely want when something something's main purpose is to explain something to you. The game that probably first comes to mind when talking about good menus is Persona 5, and I'd absolutely agree. In a lot of ways, Persona 5's menu is part of what makes me want to play the game so bad. The way the character fluidly moves from position to position, there's so much flair and pageantry on display, and it reflects on the quality of the rest of the game. No one makes a menu this stylish, slick, and over the top without caring about the product as a whole, which kind of makes up for the fact that the actual amount of information in them is pretty hefty. Menus, submenus, sub-submenus, and sub-sub-submenus. Persona 5 has so much to share, so it gives everything appropriate, standout animations that reflect what you're currently altering or checking out, making you less averse to exploring the depths of what the game offers. Going the other way, a great example of simple, down-to-business menuing is Nier Automata. These screens are very clean and matter-of-fact, with the interface also reflecting that in-game you are navigating through a high-tech robots interface. The visuals don't pop, but everything seems to fit naturally together and display a lot of information with very little physical space. Weapons will be split up based on type, and the same minimalist presentation exists even when you're looking through shops or terminals. Compare that to a game like Shadow of War. Upgrades, weapons, nemesis, quests, they all feel separate from one another, even though most can be accessed from the same place. The layouts are just tweaked a little bit each time, which leads to visual inconsistency, and none of them are creative enough to get away with that. It kind of feels like somebody made a menu and then tried to make the next one off of memory of what the last one looked like. Then there's a clunky looking world map, and my favorite part, the absolutely head-ass navigation between everything. Okay, let me try and explain this. If you press the touchpad on PlayStation, you open the map, and either pressing the touchpad again or pressing circle brings you back to the game. That's simple. To view the world map, you hold L2 when in the regional map, that's fine. Now if you're in the world map and you want to check out your army, you gotta hold R2, which will slowly lead you to the top of the region before going into the region map, after which it'll slowly move to a point in the region to go to your army. That's a bit annoying, but if you want, you can also just close the map, press options, and army is an option there, although map isn't. Even though it's not written anywhere though, if you're in this options menu and press the touchpad, you go straight to the map, but if you're on the map and press options, you aren't taken to the options menu, you're taken back to the world. So you can transfer from here to here directly, but to go the other way, you need to leave and open this menu separately. There is another way though. If you open the map and press R2 to go to your army, pressing circle doesn't take you back to the world like it does with the map and the world map, even though they're all connected through this L2 R2 bullshit. You're also not taken back to the map directly, you're taken to the options menu, because army is technically part of that. So you can't go from this menu to this menu, but there is a button that takes you from this menu to a subsection of this menu, which you can then go back on to get to this menu. Awesome. Now if you're in the army menu, you can press L1 to go to quests, the second sub menu under options, so again you can move to both of these in sequence through the map, but not directly to this overall list. At this point you might be thinking, okay, got it, so army is first, quest is second, you press L1 to move from here to here. It makes sense that to move from quest to characters you'd also press L1, same with characters to inventory, and R1 would bring you back the other way all the way up. But no, L1 takes you directly from army to quest, but R1 doesn't take you back, triangle does. R1 is for replaying the quest, even though these buttons could have easily been switched. What's the reasoning for this? But wait, not just that, there's no way to go from quest to characters. The only two that you can switch back and forth between are army and quests. You can't even go from character to inventory despite how related those two things are. You can only open these two if you go to the overall list first. But wait! Remember how you can go from the options menu to the map by pressing the touchpad? If you go to quest, there's now an explicit button saying that you can do that from here too, but if you go to army, the only indicated way to open the map is L2, even though you can press the touchpad to get to the map. But then for these two options, you can't open the map at all. Pressing touchpad does nothing. So these three are connected. These two are connected in a different and inconsistent way directly back to these two. They go to this menu when you try to go backwards. This one has a one-way connection here, this has a different one-way connection here, and these are completely isolated even though these four all fall under the same menu. And don't even get me started on the skill tree. Actually, you know what? Screw it. Get me started on it. Let's make a swift change here. What is this garbage? Instead of giving the skill tree a little bit of extra space to spread its legs and tossing in video examples as pop-ups, all of these icons are shoved to the side in a little cramped space. I'm getting claustrophobic just looking at this. The smaller hexagons seem about half a pixel in size. Everything melds together because there's no spacing between anything. There's no theme. At the end of the day, it's just so boring that it makes gaining skills feel like a chore. Why does upgrading my character look about as fun as filling out an Excel spreadsheet? This is so lame. I'm playing a game where I stab orcs in the face and convert them into MCU characters.
Right, Lord. load, not load. Same thing, really.
Can we not have a little bit of fun here? I will admit though, as hard as Shadow of War is trying to make itself look more cramped and dense than it actually is, at least it's not so unbelievably complex that it's basically hopeless to try and get your bearings. I'm all for cool designs in your skill trees, especially ones that are thematically appropriate, but sometimes in creating special designs we get an end result that's so daunting you just close the game altogether. To a lesser extent, Nioh 2 does this, but Assassin's Creed Valhalla puts it at another level, working with a really cool constellation idea that's great to look at, but makes it a genuine task to sort through it all with skills that aren't even that unique or helpful. You did not have to make it this big. You think that's bad though, and then you look at Salt and Sanctuary and just say, why? And then you look at Path of Exile and say, why? What did I do to deserve this? Why can't you just be normal? Look at the skill tree from Wolong's demo. These are the same people that made Nioh 2. This is so much more relaxing now, and the thing is, while some of these more stuffed examples do provide a lot of legitimate and diverse options, something like AC Valhalla doesn't actually provide you with all that much more than this does when you get down to brass tacks. I'm a firm believer in needing to really separate your skill trees so they don't get out of hand. Horizon Forbidden West does this very simply. There's clear barriers between skills, there's easy to follow routes that you need to take to unlock this stuff, and it's topped off with some color coordination. It might look like somebody hit the zoom button a few too many times, but we'll take that trade-off. A much more interesting example is Cult of the Lamb, a game where you have a tree for upgrading your flock and one for upgrading your equipment in Crusades, on top of other menus that let you conduct ceremonies, select rituals, equip in-run upgrades, sort through everything you can build, and a lot more, but they're all relegated to different buildings or landmarks. And even those that aren't are placed in their own little pocket areas. They don't cross-contaminate. You won't find run-based stuff here, you won't find flock-based stuff here. And for both of these trees, they only draw your attention to what's currently available at the beginning so you don't feel like a truckload of options has been dumped on you. This flock skill tree is actually pretty big and what has seemed really hard to track at first, but cleverly you can only really see the higher rows of the tree once you've improved your flock a certain amount and unlocked that next level, which takes what you're looking at from 50 down to 4 initially. Most skill trees do operate like this from a functional standpoint. You can't unlock this before you've unlocked this, for example, but the initial shock of seeing just how much is in front of you is hard to ignore, which makes this pointed focus so effective. It may limit how much you're able to plan ahead with the tree. Sometimes you want to work towards something in the third row and will prioritize putting your skills into a path that leads to that option, but the way that row unlocking works in so many of these games nowadays, you're gonna have to share the wealth a little bit anyway, so there's not much of a loss here. I always love when a game can get really creative with its skill tree outside of just aesthetically as well. Going back to Nier Automata, this game has a skill tree that imitates the idea of storage space on a microchip. You have a certain amount of storage that you can upgrade and can slot different augments which take up varying amounts of space, and you can even remove elements of your HUD to fit in an extra upgrade or two. It makes a lot of sense in the game world and turns a skill tree into a small game in and of itself, something that Ghost Runner really grabs and runs with, letting you place upgrades that all came in different shapes into a grid which forced you to think critically about which upgrades you felt were absolutely necessary and how they could all fit together while leaving space for smaller blocks that still might be useful. These both match the world and idea of their games very well, which is something that I really want to hammer home for the last section of this video, which is the first thing that everyone jumps to when thinking of UI, Just like the overall topic of UI can't be fully tackled in a single 20-minute video, we can't get into everything that makes a good heads-up display in this section, so what I wanted to hone in on is diegetic UI. Diegetic UIs are elements that exist in the game world and would be visible to the fictional character as well, like the Pip-Boy in Fallout. The idea is that your character is actually viewing this device on their wrist, which gives them information that you're also looking at, whereas non-diegetic UI refers to 2D elements that are only visible to you as a player. The character would have no way of actually seeing or interacting with it, like status bars or ammo. There's also the in-betweens of meta and spatial UI, but let's keep it simple for now. Diegetic UI is really useful in reducing the cramped and chaotic feeling of displays. Going back to the Elden Ring versus Ubisoft debate, while Elden Ring does have a lot of non-diegetic elements, it forgoes the minimap, objective checklist, and line that leads to those objectives that a Ubisoft game might have, and instead guides the player through these trails of light that emerge from the sights of grace. And in one swift movement, it garnered praise for its minimalist interface that it really doesn't have. That's how important stuff like this is. To go back on the conversation on my Discord, having interfaces that reflected the world in some way seemed to be the most important thing to most people, even though the technical term for it was never thrown around. With one person mentioning Dead Space's immersive solutions to everything from video transmissions to health itself, which is placed on the spine of your suit instead of lying flat on top of the game world. If you think about it, it makes no sense in the game world, because what an inconvenient place to have the status of your suit's integrity in the one place you can't see when you're wearing the suit. But in a game that requires a high level of immersion, it's way better to have something like this than a bar off in the corner that sticks out like a sore thumb. A few of my favorite examples of diegetic UI from recent games come from Doom, which features destructible demons letting you keep tabs on just how low their health has gotten without needing a pop-up health bar over their heads. And The Last of Us Part 2, where one more open section gives you a map that Ellie circles and crosses out and tosses information on. The map is being used canonically by Ellie in-game, and after visiting areas you see her physically add symbols to it. There are parts of the map that feel computerized, like your location for example, but it really does help blur the lines between the fictional universe and your interaction with it. I think this is what some people miss when discussing HUDs and how they should be largely removed. There needs to be some kind of replacement for this stuff. You can't just abandon it entirely. These physical maps, these beams of light, they're still UI elements, they're just masked really well. When people trash an Assassin's Creed's HUD, a common response from defenders is that you can actually turn off elements or the entirety of the HUD if you want to, and yeah, you could. Just like you could also blindfold a monkey, stick him in the middle of landlocked Colorado, spin him around 8 times, and tell him to go walk to the Atlantic Ocean. If you play Assassin's Creed with no HUD, there is crucial information that the game has decided to only indicate to you in very specific ways that you now have removed entirely. Some people do run the game like this, but there's a reason that it's so rare despite the public outcry against crowded overlays. When a character tells you to meet somewhere in this gigantic map in a place that's vaguely explained, it's infinitely harder to find it organically when what you're playing has designed itself around the idea of leading you to these objectives through markers and guided pathways. When enemy levels and health are important to the flow of battle, the fact that you can't actually see if you're fighting somebody 30 levels above you and that it'll take you 3 presidential terms to chip away half their health bar, it feels less like a fun challenge or a way to clean up your screen and more like a punishment for wanting less explicit guidance. To kind of go the other way with it, I feel like sometimes designers rely on diegetic UI to directly translate to good UI. In a lot of games you might pick up letters or read emails that give you information on a subplot or add some environmental storytelling or what have you, and while it's in theory a natural way for a character to stumble onto important information, these almost always read so awkwardly. The people in these messages don't talk like human beings speaking to other human beings. It's just a massive dump of exposition that's covered up by this natural presentation, which makes me feel less like I'm discovering secrets and more like lore and story tidbits are being shoved down my throat in a hacky and unceremonious way. I think a lot of UI could benefit from being more thematically appropriate, even if it's not necessarily existing in the game world. I always like that Joel or Ellie would look into their backpacks when sifting through their supplies, even though there's a 2D overlay that lets you interact with it. And I never liked how God of War 2018's menu felt less like something out of a fantasy game and instead seemed far more techy. You can get away with having complicated and overstuffed screens for an Iron Man game. In fact, it's somewhat encouraged since his helmet has a famously complex display in general, but what's the point of pop-up damage numbers in a world where they don't fit at all? There are reasons for things like this, for example conveying the power and efficacy of a player's weapons to them so you have a very tangible sense of progression even when the enemy health is increased to counteract your growing strength, but I think most people have started to prefer more intuitive displays over ones that provide the maximum amount of information. That doesn't mean that everything should be represented in the game world. Some level of separation is usually helpful depending on the game, and some ultra-realistic titles have arguably gone too far with how little they show, but the general gaming public is starting to slowly catch on to the faults in how some of this stuff is presented, and while we maybe don't know exactly why that is or how to change it effectively, our growing awareness of it is likely to shape exactly how the future of UI turns out. I know there's a lot more to discuss with UI, like I mentioned earlier, color choices, loading screens. We could also expand it to user experience, controls, feedback, all that stuff, but I decided to keep it to just this stuff for now because I didn't want this getting obscenely long, so hope you guys understand. If you enjoyed the video, do leave it a like. If you're new here, subscribe. Go check out my Discord. Again, it's in the description, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.